let's focus on the USA because that's where you're at and that's where you're from. Just
Mhm.
given where things currently are, culturally, socially, politically, religiously, or lack thereof, how do you even begin to untangle this knot? There's so many millions of people involved. And when I look at certain trends and certain statistics, they're not looking particularly promising in this regard. So, what do you think can pragmatically be done to help improve the situation?
That's a good question. I'm one of those people where I believe that you can learn a lot from failure. And I think there are a lot of people like myself who grow up in these tumultuous childhood situations. Some are different than mine or very similar to mine. But we now have social media, which, and for some people, it's a way to engage in discussion, to amplify certain things, and for a lot of people to realize I'm not the only one who went through this type of experience, or to find someone who did go through that experience and they're trying to figure out how do I get better? What's a better way of going about it? I think sometimes the problem is, I'll use my wife as an example. You know, for her, she grew up in a neighbor. She grew up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, back in the '80s, and she told me that the only family in her entire neighborhood that had two parents in the home, mother and the father, they were from the Caribbean. Everyone else had a separated family. So for her, it wasn't abnormal. It was relatively normal, including her circumstance. And so she it took a long time for her to realize how abnormal that was. Even though in her bubble it was normal. And especially like with us being together, and us for like the first time for her having these conversations to kind of realize like, oh, this is what I was missing out on as a little girl. And I didn't realize this. And we're just like breaking these things down as a couple for her to kind of see the impact of the father and look at myself and my son and see how much influence I have on my son. Because she grew up in an environment that minimized the impact of a father, or that only painted him as the income earner and that's all he's good for. And so if that's the case, then the woman can earn money, and then what's the guy for? With just some sexual pleasure or a headache, right? And so this is the type of environment where everyone is impregnating someone, either pushing the partner away or stepping away from the kid, and everyone just says, "Oh, that's relatively normal." But I think the difference today is that we do have a way to go outside of that bubble where my wife wouldn't have in the '80s. We do have a way of looking and saying like, "Hey, our neighbors are living a completely different way, and that looks far better." And actually, there's all different types of statistics. We have supercomputers in our pockets. Like we can look up all these stats. We can just ask a simple question to an AI chatbot, and it can give us a slew of answers that we couldn't have gotten years ago. So I think through failure causes curiosity, and that curiosity can lead to conversations, can lead to someone checking out this podcast and hearing someone who went through a similar situation but learned to do something that is drastically different than what they experienced. So I'm relatively, as much as I'm complaining about certain things, I am hopeful that the mistakes from previous generations are going to be at least examined by the younger generation, where they are saying, "Hey, wait a minute. Our parents got divorced, and that was terrible for me as a kid. Was it so bad for me as a kid? What's a better way to move forward? How can I raise my kid in a better way? How can I approach this?" Terms like family planning were never terms that I knew as a kid. Hence, when I eventually did have my son, I had my son out of wedlock because that's the environment that I grew up in. I didn't know the order. I didn't think the order was important, right? I just repeated a lot of the things that I grew up around. I think the difference was that I I wanted to make sure at the very least I was an active participant in my son's upbringing, and that's what I'm proud to accomplish.
Yeah, for sure. I want to talk more about potential solutions because
Yeah.
I don't I think this is such a hard problem. I think it's a very hard problem when, as you've said, you already have communities and you already have millions of people growing up in situations and environments where they think that a broken home is the norm. There's a big danger with
Right.
normalization, right? Once something becomes normal and it becomes like, oh, well, most people are doing that thing, then it's harder for, the truth is most people repeat to some degree what is modeled for them. That's just humanity. Of course,
Mhm.
people can break cycles for good or for bad, but most people do something pretty similar to what the people around them did and grew up in. That's just how it goes. So it's one of these multi generational issues where it's taken several generations and many, many decades, some could argue, even argue centuries, to get to its current state. So
Yeah.
here we are now in 2025, and the statistics are what they are, and this one's trending up, and this one is trending down, and it's just this way. But I don't know, just sort of practically and pragmatically. This isn't the only issue that's like that. I just often wonder,
Mhm.
as someone who does have these type of conversations publicly and privately all the time, um, it's like I know on paper what the solution is, and it's very easy to tweet the solution, right? Just like it's a nice it's a nice virtue signal and nice easy way to get lots of likes and reposts, just to give the one sentence, just get married, stay married, have kids, right? Like it's not like it's complicated, but it is complicated when you are talking about a nation of 400 million people and a world of 8 billion people. And you've
Right.
already got all of these factors: social, economic, relational, emotional, financial, legal, political. You've just got this entire web like the culture. You've got this entire web, and from that point it's like, okay, yeah, sure, I get the it's a bit like, I'll tell you what I think it's similar to. It's similar to, like, it's similar to tackling obesity at scale. So
Right.
if one individual comes to me and is like, Zuby, I want to lose weight, I want to get in shape, whatever, I know exactly how to advise him. I know exactly how to help him. I know exactly what he can do to get in better shape. But if someone is pointing out the fact that, okay, look at the USA, 42% of Americans now are obese, over 70% overweight or obese. Like, how do we fix this? And yeah, I could just be like, oh, everyone just needs to exercise more and move more, right? Like, obviously. Um, and that's easy to say, but but you're dealing with human beings here. You're dealing with emotions. You're dealing with social and cultural factors. You're dealing with the economy. You're dealing with people's education or lack thereof. And it's just like, gosh. And of course, on top of it all, you're dealing with sin because you're dealing with human beings, and people make
Right.
mistakes, right? People make mistakes. Sometimes they're totally understandable and you can empathize. Sometimes they're like so outside the realm of bounds that you're like, oh my gosh, like that's a crazy or a very stupid thing to do. But I just don't know how we scale the solutions for these types of issues on a public or a national level. That's what I'm really curious about. And I don't know if I've ever heard I don't know if I've ever heard a great answer to that. I don't know.
Well, I would say this. You're going to have a problem trying to scale the solution. I think the first part is that we have to acknowledge that there's a problem, right? You cannot change what you don't acknowledge. So we actually need to scale the we have to scale letting people know that there is a problem. And I think that's the beginning point. Because when you show people that there's a problem, then that causes people to think about it, that causes people to change, right? And then the solution is just a form of, well, people are already seeking it, right? So we'll use like COVID, for example. Um, there is a new virus, there's a problem. Okay, then the natural response is, I acknowledge that there's a problem. So how do I mitigate it? What do I have to do? Right. And then there's going to be just this natural response from people to seek for answers. And then that's when, boom, it's already there. We already have the answers. Right. We actually have a bigger problem getting people to acknowledge that there is a problem. Right. Because For example, the left wing circle wants to say, well, fathers are optional, essentially. Um, you do you, right? There's all these like self-aggrandizing rhetoric for you to chase and be happy. It's all about yourself, um, and that's something that we have to have. We're having trouble overcoming, right? We have to undo this rhetoric, tying your emotional health, tying your happiness to being the exact same for your kid, or that your decisions matter first, your kids will be fine. It's these are the things that we've developed over the years so people don't feel some sort of guilt. And even more so, we don't engage in shame. We don't engage in public shame, like a healthy amount of shame, or even just like if your brother is abandoning his kids, you should be able to call him on it. Like, hey, you're abandoning your kids. You know you're not supposed to do that. And try to shame his behavior because you care about those kids more than you care about your brother, right? So it's that type of dynamic where we have a weakness of will to even pressure people who are in our lives to let them know that what they're doing is not just immoral, but it's something that goes against everything that they were raised to do. So even just the person who is doing the right thing within their family, we have to check each other. There's checks and balances that happen within ourselves, within our families, and I think there needs to be more of that. But I think the biggest problem is just getting people to acknowledge that there is a problem in the first place.
Yeah, and that in itself is extremely difficult because millions of
Right.
people genuinely don't even think it's a problem. And then others have, personal reasons why they wouldn't want to acknowledge that. And
Mm.
the bigger that percentage, I think the 24% you said earlier, the bigger that number gets, the more people will feel, personally convicted to convince themselves and others that it's not any type of problem because human beings are self-interested. One stat I'd like to know, I don't know if you know this, I'd be very curious to know what percentage of, I don't know, broken homes or single parent homes are. I'd love to know what percentage are like essentially voluntary versus involuntary, because there's lots of different scenarios that can lead to those situations.
I think I understand what you mean. Like someone who, a father who stepped away from the kids versus a father where the courts are preventing him from seeing his kids, like something like that.
Yeah, or the mother. Like it's not exactly rare for if there's a bad relationship between the parents for one, in most cases, the mother to um, use the children as some type of weapon and intentionally alienate them directly or indirectly from the father. And then there are people who very intentionally, just have kids, and there wasn't even a relationship to begin with. And then you have people who are just kind of single parents by choice. Even now, there's like technology where people are just like, a woman is hitting a certain age and there's no man in her life, and she just wants to go down to a sperm bank and do that. And then you've got all the surrogacy, and yeah, there's all sorts of different scenarios, and some of them are much more. It's much easier to be compassionate about certain ones than others. But ultimately, which is the point of what you're saying, it's the children ultimately who are left missing, you know, missing at least one relationship.
Those scenarios are all highly subjective, so I think it would be very hard to get some sort of survey because the father might be like, "She's keeping the kids from me," and the mother's like, "I'm not keeping the kids from him." And it's like, well, who's telling the truth? I don't know. It's all very subjective. The thing I will say is, I've seen many of situations where it's very difficult for me to kind of say this. I've seen many of situations where I'm like, "You guys were two damaged people who should have never made kids." Like, and you can't stop people from procreating, and I'm not trying to stop people from procreating. I'm trying to have people be very mindful before they procreate, right? Not just, um, for example, from I can speak from a guy's perspective. You get with a girl, you think she's hot, you have sex with her a bunch of times, she gets pregnant. Now you're in this circumstance. All right, I guess I got to get married. But none of that was intentional. Like none of that was it was just responding. All right, well this is happening. I guess I got to do this, I got to do this. And then you find you get married to this person and then 3 years later you're like you're miserable. She's a terrible wife. Like, you're probably a terrible mother because she wasn't the type of person you should procreate with. And then you end up in this perpetual cycle of fighting with someone who doesn't like you, never respected you. Like, it just becomes this entire dynamic that was avoidable if you were having family planning in mind in the first place. And it might ruin a bunch of people's like sex lives, but imagine the person you're about to have sex with being the mother or father of your kids. Is that the person that you actually want to be the mother and father of your kids? And that I think is really important. Does this person have the qualities to be the mother and father of your children, even if you don't necessarily want kids or not? Because guess what? Lots of people who didn't necessarily want kids end up having kids. So you have to really think about these things. Do you trust this person to raise your future children? If the answer is no, you probably shouldn't be having sex with them, right? Or at the very least, wrap it up. Do some birth control or something, right? But don't just it feels good and just raw dog it. Like you have to be very these are things that mature adults approach. This is how you think about stuff, right? And while my wife and I haven't had any children, and there's a possibility we may not be able to because of our ages, it is something that I've consciously thought of. I wanted someone who has the qualities of a mother for my potential children, right? And that's the type of person that I want to have as a wife, and that's the type of person I want to have as a potential mother. So these are very conscious things that I've thought about. These are things I learned later on in my adult years because I didn't grow up with this intentional thinking when it comes to choosing a partner for many years. And I mean, thankfully, I didn't have any kids with these previous women. But for many years, I just she's the woman that likes me and I like her back, and that's this is how we're moving. And a
Yeah.
lot of guys are like that. A lot of women are like that, and they end up in these tumultuous situations where the guy or the woman is a terrible parent, or they're terrible to co-parent with because there was never any foundation of friendship. There was never any foundation of real, genuine love. It was all lustful. It was just moving at the seat of their pants. It's everything else but thinking about the potential of having children. So if there's even one thing of let me think about my potential children that can enter the mind of a future father or mother, that would alleviate so many of these potential headaches. But I can't tell you how many circumstances where they tell their story of getting divorced and all this other stuff. And it's like, but bro, you married a stripper. Like, I don't know. I don't know what you were expecting.
Dude, you know what? I'm gonna say something which is it's very real, but it might be controversial. And I think one of the big issues that's going on, like especially from the conservative side, you hear a lot of complaints and concerns about marriage rates declining and about the birth rate declining and people not coupling up or people not staying together and so on. Sometimes I wonder if, and women are all asking, where have all the good men gone? Men are asking the same question, where have the good women gone? I mean, I sometimes wonder, like, what percentage of the modern population is actually like marriageable in terms of like what percentage of men meet the criteria that, let's just say like a decent woman, however you want to define that, is looking for, and how many women now meet the criteria of like, oh yeah, actually she'd be a wonderful wife and mother. Like I do wonder if those percentages are genuinely declining. Um, I think people have all sorts of like weird, new liberal modern ideas about relationships and this, and too much focus on romanticism and not take, and obviously you've massively denigrated the bedrock of the Christian religious foundations on all of these things. But I don't know, like I didn't exist in any other time in history, right? But sometimes I just wonder, like, it does seem to me that the quality when it comes to like marriage and being a potential father or mother, it seems like the quality of the average man and woman has just declined. And part of the reason why there are fewer marriages and fewer people coupling up and fewer people having kids is just like they're genuinely not finding that person. Like there aren't enough of those people to go around almost. Um, and I don't think it's just because like everyone is being like stupidly picky. I do actually I don't know, like if I'm obviously a man, right? But like, if I try to think, okay, if I were a woman, or I have sisters, and all my siblings are all married, they've all got kids, like they're out of that game. But if I think of like I don't know a young woman who's got her head screwed on, and she's decently attractive and so on, and she's there trying to like find a guy, and I myself, from a man perspective, I'm looking myself at like the guys, and I'm kind of like, geez, like most of these guys are not reaching the level. Like most of these guys are missing the mark. And then from the male perspective, you're looking at women and like their behavior and their values and their beliefs and all the things like that. And you're just like, most of these women are not marriageable. Like if you're a guy who's got his stuff together, like you wouldn't want to have a serious relationship, let alone a marriage and children with most of these women. And like no one really says that because it sounds it sounds very mean and like sort of wrong to say, but I'm just like, I think part of the problem is just people are not, um, in terms of in terms of their values, in terms of their behaviors, in terms of just like maintaining their own level of attractiveness. I mean, even if you just look at photos from like the 40s, the 30s, the 50s, like people just looked better even. Like even just on the pure physical, like people looked better. Like people were in better shape, people were better dressed, people were like better groomed. They didn't have all the technology and stuff we have now, but the average man, the average woman, like they took care of themselves, even if they weren't rich. And I just think now that just the culture, it's just whatever, just everyone accept me how I am, whatever, like I don't need to do anything, I'm just going to do whatever, roll out of bed, and someone should just love me exactly how I am. Yep, I have all these bad habits, I have all these addictions, I have all these issues, I have all this trauma, I have all this baggage, but I should just be accepted exactly as how I am. I don't want to do any work. And I just think that that is delusional, and I've done quite a rant here, but I think that that is a lot of what is I do genuinely think that that's a lot of what is going on.
Well, I do have a theory. My theory is that could there be more people who are less marriageable? Sure. It's hard to tell how many, but I think the problem is how we select partners and not necessarily that there aren't any good partners. So, for example, online dating is terrible because it turns people into billboards.
Mhm.
And you and I are human beings, right? And so, if you tell me to summarize myself in a paragraph, that's very difficult to do. You've met, and I know you famously met a ton of people, right, in person. You've met someone briefly in person, and you're like, I like this person. You don't even know a ton about them, but there's something about that person that you really like. Their demeanor, how they carry themselves, not even necessarily what they're wearing, but there's something about them. There's an aura to them. And you've met people that you want to stay away from, and you've only met them briefly, right? There's a human interaction and a human instinct about each other that is hard to transmit through technology, and it's
Mhm.
even worse through text. So you have people who are getting rid of all of that, like women say vibes, right? I didn't have any vibes with him. People make fun of that. I think what they're talking about is instinct. Like there's no instinctual connection with this person. And that matters to them. And if they have to try, it's probably fake. Um, so we turn everybody into human billboards. It gets rid of that. And then how are we meeting people? We're meeting people through artificial places where throughout human history, the guy that is going to marry the woman probably married the woman who was local to him. So there was some sort of connection. For example, my wife, I knew her brother. So when we started talking as friends, she felt comfortable talking to me because I knew her brother, right? I hold some sort of social responsibility, at least to her brother. Whereas that guy you meet on a social media app, he doesn't know you, no one knows him. And if he takes you on 2 dates, bangs you, and never calls you back, there's no sort of social repercussions to him. He can move on and do that 100 times. So we don't have that social repercussion anymore. For women, especially, they don't have some sort of social currency to validate the guy, because for a lot of women, it's about, do I feel safe with this person, right? Because they're the weaker sex. So for my wife, she has her brother, and she can go to her brother. What's he like? Is he safe? Yes, he's safe. You can talk to him. He's been over to my house. Okay, she can lower her guard and engage in a conversation with me. And from a friendship, we turned into a relationship.
Yeah.
But I had him to social proof me. For dating apps, you don't have any sort of social proof. So people can use people, throw away people. Remember, you're just a billboard online, right? And I swipe left or swipe right on you, and I can treat you however I want to treat you. There is no social repercussion for me mistreating you. And so that's how people are moving about. They're not moving about in a human way. They're moving about in a very artificial way, in a very non-human way, and that has human repercussions. It makes us feel like humans are far terrible than they actually are. When the reality is that certain people are gaming the non-human system, right? It just becomes a number game. You're just a number. You're not a person. You're not Zuby. You're number 522, right? So I think it's how we're approaching relationships. We're eliminating the human element of interaction, because I can't tell you how many times women meet somebody somewhere randomly or meet someone at their job, and you would be like, you would get with that guy, but they'll tell you like, there's something about that guy I like. I like a lot.
Mhm.
And like, for example, I'm different than the men that my wife has previously had relationships with. If she put me on a social media app, she probably wouldn't have swiped me. She might not like me saying that, but like, she probably wouldn't have swiped me because I don't look like the typical guy that she would have dated.
Yeah.
But she got to know me as a human being, as a person, and we don't get that when you just have a face, age, location, and just a brief bio of you trying to be clever.